Welcome to tonight's Terror, where you can expect original scary stories. Nothing here is written or narrated by AI. If you enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for visiting, and enjoy the story.
When I first bought the second house, 5 hours away from my apartment in the city, it felt like an escape. Nestled at the edge of a forested valley, the property was peaceful, idyllic. The real estate agent described it as the perfect retreat, and I believed it. But the real reason I bought it was pragmatic. The city had become a nightmare throughout the COVID pandemic, and I didn't want to go through that again. With remote work becoming the standard, I wanted a refuge for whenever the city became unbearable. To monitor the place, I installed cameras inside and out. The setup, a handful of discrete devices with motion alerts, gave me peace of mind. For a while, the novelty of checking the feeds didn't wear off. I would log in from my desk at work, admiring the swaying of the trees, or the occasional deer wandering into the backyard. The cameras recorded in color during the day and switched to a greenish-gray tone at night, the infrared LEDs casting an uncanny glow over the property. After a month or so, I started checking less often. Life was busy, and the house always seemed to be just as I'd left it, quiet, empty, and safe. That changed on a Thursday morning when I woke to a motion alert from the backyard camera. Half asleep, I pulled up the app on my phone. The notification was timestamped for 2:13 a.m. I scrubbed through the recording. At first, I saw nothing but the usual, the outline of tree branches shifting in the wind. Then, just at the edge of the frame, there was something else. A suggestion of movement, maybe a figure. It was hard to tell. The camera's range ended in a haze of static and shadow. I chalked it up to an animal. A black bear, perhaps. The house was in a remote area, after all. Still, the thought of something, someone, lurking just out of sight lingered, nibbling at the edge of my thoughts all day. The next night, another alert, this time at 2:27 a.m. I didn't see the notification until I woke up the next morning. With a creeping sense of dread, I opened the app and reviewed the footage. What I saw made my skin crawl. A man stood in the backyard, just beyond the porch floodlight's reach. He was tall, his face indistinct, but turned toward the house. He didn't move. I felt like I was watching a creepy video making the rounds on the internet, not my house. I watched, holding my breath. He wasn't doing anything, hands in his coat pockets, looking up at my house. I scrubbed ahead through the recording. For over an hour, he stood there, staring. Finally, as I dragged my finger along, moving the footage ahead, he was gone. I slowed down and backed up, but as far as I could tell, there was no recording of him leaving. One frame he was there, and the next he was gone. I sat up in bed, thinking, why was he there? Was he lost? Mentally unwell? On drugs? Why else would he stand there so long, doing nothing? Was he doing nothing? Or was he planning something? I called the local police department upstate. The officer who answered sounded sympathetic but unsurprised. Did he attempt to break in? Did he take anything? No, I responded, but he was there for a really long time. Comes off as menacing when you watch it. I don't think the guy is all there, if you know what I mean. He's trespassing, isn't that enough? I asked, frustration mounting. Unfortunately, we can't do much unless a crime's been committed. Theft, breaking and entering, property damage. Keep monitoring your cameras, and if he comes back, let us know. Not helpful. I decided to drive up to the house. I'd check things out myself, maybe stay for a few days. I could just stay the weekend and check off a few chores I needed to handle before winter really closed in. The drive upstate felt extra long. Normally, I'd make the drive full of excitement to enjoy time at my house. That day, I was a bit worried about what I'd find when I got there. I'd invited a few friends to come along. I used the excuse that they hadn't seen the place yet. But really, I didn't relish the idea of being there alone just then. They'd declined. Both had concert tickets. By the time I arrived, it was late afternoon. The sky was heavy and gray with clouds. The house looked the same as always, serene, undisturbed. I walked the perimeter, checking the cameras and the locks. Everything was in place. The doors were secure, the camera's Ethernet lines intact. The wind was gusting angrily. I scanned the tree line again and again, looking for anything that didn't belong. That night, I hunkered down in the living room. I set my laptop on the coffee table, the live feeds from the cameras displayed on the screen. I had a thermos of coffee and a heavy flashlight within arm's reach. Hours passed. The feeds remained uneventful. A rabbit darted across the yard. An owl swooped low, but there was no sign of the man. By 3 a.m., I began to doubt myself. Maybe he was just a drifter passing through, someone who had already moved on. Would other people be this obsessive about it? The distorted figure on the first night, the stationary man on the second. This was beginning to feel like a whole lot of nothing. Sleep weighed heavily on me, but I resisted, determined to see the night through. Then, just before dawn, the motion alert pinged. The doorbell camera at the front door. I froze, staring at the screen. The feed flickered once, then stabilized. The stoop was empty. A few mums rustled lightly in the breeze. Nothing else moved. I kept watching, thinking someone had triggered the camera and then moved away. But no one appeared. As I clicked away from the front door feed to check some of the other areas, the doorbell rang. Its shrill tone cut through the silence of the house, and I jumped from my chair, my phone bouncing to the floor. I snatched it up without taking my eyes off the screen. The doorbell had seemingly triggered itself. There was no one on the stoop. Frustrated now, I rubbed my eyes with exhaustion. I cranked the volume on the motion alerts, laid down on the couch and closed my eyes. At some point, I drifted off and got a few hours of sleep. The next day passed largely without incident, but I remained on high alert. My body ached from the mostly sleepless night, but I busied myself with seasonal upkeep, clearing leaves from the gutters, checking the furnace, restocking the wood pile for the fireplace. Every creak of the house and rustle of wind kept me on edge. I checked the camera feeds obsessively, scanning for any hint of movement. At lunch, I sat at the dining room table with a hastily made sandwich. The forest loomed beyond the window, its dark boughs swaying in the wind. Halfway through the meal, I caught a flash of red moving through the trees. My heart leapt, and I leaned forward, furrowing my brow and straining to see. But the color was already gone, and no further movement followed. Was that a trick of the light? A bird? A piece of clothing? By mid-afternoon, exhaustion caught up with me. I set an alarm, stretched out on the couch, and put white noise on my phone. The stillness of the house unnerved me, but sleep overcame me quickly. When I woke, the sun was sinking below the horizon. I brewed a pot of coffee, steeling myself for another night on guard duty. As I got organized, I remembered I'd left my flashlight on the hood of the car while working outside earlier. I grabbed my coat and stepped outside, the chill of the evening surprising me as I hustled across the driveway. I approached the car and a sinking feeling settled over me. 2 of the tires were flat. I crouched down and ran my fingers along the rubber. The cuts were jagged, unmistakable. Fear and indignance surged through me as I paced furiously back inside, white knuckles wrapped around the heavy flashlight handle. I took a breath and tried to calm myself, dialing the local police again. This time, the dispatcher's tone bordered on annoyed. "Sir, are you sure you didn't mean to call a towing service?" "No, I'm calling because someone slashed my tires. That's vandalism, property damage, isn't it?" "We'll note it down, but I'll level with you. Unless you have evidence of who did it, there's not much we can do. You might want to call a tow company to get that taken care of." Frustrated, I ended the call. I scrubbed through the camera recordings, searching for any clue. The footage showed nothing unusual during the day. But the cameras had all inexplicably cut out for several minutes around dusk. This sometimes happened during dramatic light changes, so it wasn't exactly supernatural to lose the image as the sun set. But astoundingly, it had happened with every single camera, not just those outside. By the time the picture stabilized again, the car was already damaged. I called a towing yard and set up an appointment to have the car brought in for new tires. They wouldn't be coming until the morning. I began pacing the house with the lights off. If someone was out there, I didn't want to give them a good look inside, or at me. A few paranoid circuits of the place, glancing out every window, yielded nothing amiss. Standing behind the couch, I looked at the computer screen. Each camera feed represented a little 1/8 screen-sized box. I squinted at the feed in the bottom left, the backyard. There was something out of place. I scrambled over the couch and expanded the view of that camera. A rippling shock of red snaked across the screen. A red scarf, wrapped once around a tree branch and snapping in the wind. That had to have been left there in the last few minutes, I thought grimly. "Nope," I said aloud. I wasn't taking the bait, if that's what this was. I decided to stay inside and watch the scarf twist in the wind, rather than go out there. I stood and began to pull the couch in an awkward 180-degree arc until it faced the large picture window looking into the backyard. I brought the laptop around from the coffee table and plopped myself down, fully prepared to watch the screen and the backyard for the rest of the night. The night stretched on, punctuated by the wind rattling the window panes and the occasional creak of the house settling. I watched the live camera feeds from around the house and outdoors while keeping half an eye on the backyard, my eyes flitting between the screen and the view beyond the glass. The red scarf whipped violently in the wind, a bright streak in an otherwise monochrome scene. Just after midnight, the motion alert pinged again. This time, it was the backyard camera. I tensed, leaning closer to the screen. A figure emerged at the edge of the feed where the faint glow of the porch light met the shadows. It was the man. His tall frame was hunched against the wind, hands jammed into the pockets of a dark coat. He moved slowly, stepping further into view until he was standing beside the scarf. I could see him more clearly now. His face was still somewhat obscured, whether by shadow, his hood, or both. I couldn't quite tell. But he wasn't staring at the house this time. He was looking up at the scarf, his head tilted slightly as though studying it. Then, with a sharp movement, he reached up and yanked it free from the branch. Chill ran down my spine as he turned and began walking toward the house. I scrambled for my phone, fingers shaking as I dialed 911. The operator answered, her voice steady and calm, but I could barely get the words out. "There's a man on my property. He's coming toward my house. I'm alone. I don't know what he wants." The operator began asking for details, but I barely heard. My eyes were glued to the window. The man had reached the edge of the porch light's reach. He paused there, his face still hidden, and raised one arm. For a moment, I thought he was reaching up toward the door. Instead, he held up the scarf. It dangled limply in the wind, a mockery of the quiet safety I'd once felt in this house. Then, with sudden, crisp movements, he tied the scarf to the porch railing. "What is he doing now?" the operator asked, her voice cutting through my daze. He's tying something to my porch," I said, my voice trembling. "A scarf. It's the scarf I saw earlier." "Stay inside," she instructed. "Officers are on their way. Keep your doors locked." As she spoke, the man turned toward the house. He seemed to stare directly at the camera, as though he knew I was watching. Then, in a swift, fluid motion, he raised his hand and waved. I froze. The wave wasn't threatening. It was casual, almost friendly. Then he stepped backward into the darkness, disappearing from view. I clicked frantically through the feeds, trying to find him, but it was as though he'd vanished into thin air. The scarf fluttered on the porch, the only evidence he'd ever been there. Minutes later, red and blue lights flashed at the end of the driveway. I ran to the door and threw it open as two officers approached the house, their flashlights cutting through the dark. "He was here," I blurted, pointing toward the porch. "He tied that to the railing and then I lost it." The officers exchanged a glance before stepping onto the porch. They examined the scarf and the surrounding area. After a thorough sweep, they returned to the house. "There's no sign of anyone now," one of them said. "But those tire slashes and this scarf, it's clear somebody's looking to frighten you, or worse. We'll keep a patrol car nearby for the night." I nodded, though their words did little to ease my fear. They offered to stay parked at the end of the driveway until morning, and I gratefully agreed. Inside, I checked every door and window, making sure everyone was locked. But even with the police outside, I couldn't lose the feeling that this man was still watching, waiting for the moment when I'd let my guard down. When dawn broke, I packed my bag and waited for the tow truck. The house, once my haven of relaxation, now felt like a trap. I didn't know if I'd ever feel safe there again. The rest of the day unfolded unremarkably. The tow truck arrived, pulled my car to a tire wholesaler, and soon enough I was on my way back to the city. In the days following that traumatic and odd weekend, I checked the video feed at the house like I was watching a horror movie. I was genuinely terrified that I'd see the little bell icon light up red to indicate motion on the property. Scanning through the different camera angles, I would flinch with every click. Weeks passed without incident, and the entire ordeal started to feel like a random chance encounter with some imbalanced drifter. Some weirdo who had wandered onto the property and become fixated for some reason. Still, I had no desire to get back to the house and enjoy a long weekend out of the city. I didn't know when I ever would again. After 2 months of actively avoiding my own house, I made the difficult decision to sell the property. I could look for something else, perhaps something a bit less isolated. My friend, Kate, had recently gotten her real estate license, so I reached out and asked her to list it for me. She was thrilled for the chance to help out and, no doubt, earn a commission. I sent her the photos from the listing when I'd bought the place because that's all I had. She asked to come over and meet to put some plans in motion. As we chatted, I apologized for not having more up-to-date photos of the house, but she brushed that off, saying she'd have her photographer make the drive upstate and take new ones. When I tried to describe the few modest updates I'd made on the house, Kate had more questions about design than I could answer. She wasn't going to be able to make the trip up to the house for at least a week. If she was going to get to work drafting a listing, She'd need more information. I suggested that she click through the security camera feed to get a sense of what we were dealing with. I left her with a laptop and went to the kitchen to bring her a can of seltzer. "What is this?" I heard her ask from the other room. There was a slight tremor in her voice. As I stepped back into the dining room, I saw she was now standing several feet back from the table, staring at the screen, a pained expression on her face. "Is this some kind of a joke?" she sputtered. I approached, a look of dread spreading over my face. I looked at the screen and blinked hard. Looking again, I was struck by that uncanny feeling that I was watching a movie, some other house, events that couldn't touch me. The security application was open, and the living room camera was expanded to full screen. The man I'd seen at the house the month before stood, his hands on his hips, in my living room, 200 miles away. "Who is that?" Kate stammered. I didn't answer. I gaped at the computer screen, stupefied by the scene taking place, in real time, in my house. The intruder, who'd tied the scarf to my porch, now stood with eerie confidence in my living room. In front of him were 3 people on the couch. They were all tied by the hands and blindfolded. They weren't squirming or trying to shout. It was just the opposite, and it was all the more horrible for it. One, a middle-aged man, was slumped, perhaps lifelessly, to the side, jaw pressed awkwardly to the arm of the couch. The 2 others leaned against one another, eyes cast, although blindfolded, to the floor. My stomach dropped as I stared at the screen. The man stood motionless, his presence dominating the frame. Slowly, he turned toward the camera, as if he knew I was watching. His face, once obscured, was now visible in the grainy feed. It was hollow, pale, and stretched into a grotesque mockery of a smile. "What's happening?" Kate whispered. "I don't know," I croaked, my voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. The man began moving, stepping out of the frame. I frantically toggled between the other camera feeds, trying to find him. Finally, the kitchen camera picked him up. He was walking toward a counter where a row of objects had been neatly arranged. A hammer, some rope, and something small and metallic. An unlit blowtorch. In a panic, I hit the 2-way talk button on the security app. "Hey, you need to get out of there. The cops are on their way," I lied. The man looked, smiling at the kitchen camera, and shook his head playfully. "What's he doing with them?" Kate demanded, her voice rising in panic. I didn't answer. My mind raced as I struggled to make sense of what I was seeing. Why the blindfolds? Why the silence? Were they even alive? The man reappeared in the living room feed, but he wasn't holding any of the menacing objects from the counter. He only carried a notebook and a marker. He flipped a page and held it up to the camera. The words, scrawled in thick black ink, were chillingly simple. "You left our place empty." Kate let out a soft gasp, stepping further back. I grabbed the laptop, my hands trembling so badly I nearly dropped it. The man held up the next page. "Mine." A cold sweat broke out across my scalp. He flipped the notebook and the next page appeared. "You can be my witness," he'd written. Witness to what? The man tore the page dramatically and let it fall to the floor. He reached down and yanked harshly at the arm of the slumped figure on the couch. The figure didn't react whatsoever to being grabbed. The arm and hand flopped limply. I recoiled, gagging, and slammed the laptop shut. Was that guy Kate began, but didn't finish. She pulled out her phone. "We have to call the police." I nodded dumbly. She was already dialing. I don't remember the next few minutes too well. Kate was shouting into her phone, begging the dispatcher to send help immediately, but I barely heard her. My vision tunneled, focused on the closed laptop. I was startled from my daze by the ping of my phone in my pocket. Without thinking much at all, I pulled it out and swiped across the notification. As I did, the symbol and words registered in my mind: motion detected. Before I could think to close the app or toss the phone away, I was again looking at my living room. The man stood staring directly at the camera. The three tied and blindfolded people were gone. He stared into the lens for a long moment. Then, with something like an apologetic smile, he shrugged. He dropped something from his hand, a piece of firewood, I think, and turned. He stalked off toward the back door and was gone. I instinctively tried to follow him to the next camera feed. I clicked over to the backyard angle. The man wasn't there. But the two captives who had been leaning on one another were. Now, hands untied but still blindfolded, they walked, gingerly, one behind the other. The one behind held tightly to a clutch of the other's shirt. They stumbled across the backyard and into the woods. I watched, both horrified and mesmerized by the appalling absurdity of all of this. They carried on, seemingly on their own free will, until I could no longer make them out among the trees. As the next few weeks unfolded, I was unsurprised to learn the police found nothing and ultimately did nothing to sort out what had happened. They had a quiet town with a great reputation for tourism. I think once they realized there was no strong evidence to follow, they were more than happy to let the case wither and die quietly. I would have kicked up more of a fuss if I had any interest at all in keeping the house. As soon as the police let me know they were done investigating the house and property, I had the house listed to sell. I went with a local agent who knew nothing of the strange events during the final months of my ownership. I still haven't bought another place outside the city. I'll take my chances here.